now we're in a series right now called Heaven, and I just wanted to cite my sources a little bit. If heaven is a great interest topic for you, I really recommend this book. It's called Heaven by Randy Alcorn. This literally is the canon of like heaven theology. And so I want to encourage you to, if this is something that you're interested in, pick it up. If this is something that sort of tinkles your ear a little bit, pick this up because a lot of study has gone into this book, and it is certainly it's packed with scripture. It's complete, and it is a whole picture on all that it is heaven. The reason why we're talking about heaven is because a year ago I had a conversation with someone, and they said that they were a little bit apprehensive about heaven because they didn't want to be an angel floating in the sky because they have grown to love things here on earth, but it was kind of hard for them to imagine that they'd have to leave it all forever. And just last week, I was talking to someone, I was saying, hey, we're going to be having this conversation on heaven, and they said, man, I can't even imagine what heaven's going to be like. And then underneath my breath, I looked at them and I said, I can. See, there's a real power in knowing and being able to imagine what heaven is like. And so today, we are going to be doing something really unique, and that I'm going to share with you how to imagine heaven. How to imagine heaven. See, the reason why we need to imagine heaven is sometimes because we need to debunk some myths and lies that we believed about heaven, and we need to do more than just say what heaven isn't, but talk about what heaven is. For instance, I asked someone, I say, hey, why are you afraid to go to heaven? Or you know, why is it difficult for you for the idea of wrapping your mind around heaven? Someone says that heaven is going to be no fun. It's going to be something that's going to be boring. When I was thinking about this, I thought about Trent. Let's throw this up. I was thinking about this cartoon with Calvin and Hobbes. See, Calvin and Hobbes, he's having this conversation with the stuffed tiger, and he says, "If heaven is good, and if I like to be bad, how am I supposed to be happy there? How will you get to heaven if you like to be bad?" Hobbes asked. "Let's say I don't do what I wanted to do. Suppose I led a blameless life. Suppose I denied my true dark nature." Hobbes says, "I'm not sure if I have that much imagination." Calvin responds, "Maybe heaven's a place where you're allowed to be bad." See, some of us, we have a hard time like dreaming of heaven because in our mind it's just something that's boring. It's not fun. I like to be bad, and heaven isn't a place where I can do that. Sometimes some people think that heaven, we don't like the idea of heaven because it has no familiarity. When we think about heaven, it is something that it's hard for us to wrap our mind around because we have an idea that we're like angels in the sky and there's clouds and it's nebulous and it's vague and everything in this life is physical and it's concrete and it's hard for me to wrap my mind around something that is so distant and unfamiliar. How many of you guys ever read Huckleberry Finn in like 5th grade, right? Huckleberry Finn, he has this great conversation with his Sunday school teacher, and Sunday school teacher said, Huckleberry Finn is recalling this conversation, and he says, "She went on and told me about this good place, heaven being. She said that all the boys would have to do there was go around all day with a harp and sing forever and ever. So I didn't think much of it. I asked her if she reckoned Tom Sawyer would go there, and she said not by a considerable sight. I was glad about that, because I wanted him and me to be together." See, Huckleberry Finn was someone who was adventurous, and he was dangerous, and he was someone that was always looking for discovery. And so the idea of walking around with a harp and singing just didn't exactly tickle his fancy. It wasn't something that was familiar. It wasn't something that he necessarily liked. And so some people that have a hard time with heaven have a hard time because they think it's not going to be fun, they think it's not going to be familiar, and they also think that it's not going to be pleasurable. How many times have we seen sort of in the movie sort of scenario? What was it? It was Independence Day. It was right before the aliens were about to come down and destroy the earth. The girl was in the RV and she looks at her boyfriend and says, "I don't want to die a virgin." Because we think that pleasure here on earth is going to be better than whatever's on the other side of death. And so we have this idea, because it's not fun, it's not familiar, it's not pleasurable, that heaven isn't something I exactly want to think about. But some of us are good Christians in this room, and we know that that's not how we like to describe heaven. How we like to describe heaven is that there are no tears, there's no pain, there's no death. Right? It's a famous passage in Revelation chapter 21. And so we have here these different descriptions of what heaven is, but this is exactly the problem. No fun, no familiarity, no pleasure, no tears, no pain, no death. And this in here lies the problem, because we describe heaven by knows rather than what we know. We describe it by, it's not any of those things, but we don't describe it by anything that we do know what heaven is going to be about. And this is why it's important, is because imagination is a form of worship. And it needs to be fostered in a better way that allows the mind to imagine all that God has planned. Imagination needs something more than what something is not. See, the Bible is bookended with a call for God's people to have a vivid imagination. In the first 2 chapters of Genesis, it's the only recorded passage of what it looks like for God and man to be with one another without sin. See, heaven is going to look a lot more like Eden, I think, than we realize. And it's bookended on the back end. The last 2 chapters of Revelation has this vivid description of the new heaven and the new earth. I think heaven is going to look a lot more like earth than we realize. And so it's a call for us to imagine, to picture, to daydream about what it's going to be like to walk with God. What does that destination look like? I believe full-heartedly that imagination is a great form of worship. In the best ways, and probably in some negative ways too. Jesus says that we need to take our thoughts captive, because what we think about can turn into idolatry and into worship. Likewise, that's why Colossians 3 says to set your mind on the things of heaven. And so we are going to learn today how to set our mind to the things of heaven, even though it may be difficult for us. But I promise you that there's a lot of value in it. Just the other day, I was rolling down 101, and I was listening to Damien Rice. And I was listening to Damien Rice, and I was listening to Damien Rice, and I was all of a sudden I got whisked away to Ireland when I was listening to Damien Rice. And I got whisked away because I told Evie on our 10th anniversary we were going to go to Ireland. We were going to go to her home village and where her ancestors were. And so I was listening to Damien, and he's Irish, and I was imagining Evie on this sort of grassy knoll hillside overlooking the ocean with an ukulele, and she's just like totally in her happy spot. And of course it's drizzly and rainy, but that's exactly the kind of weather that she loves. And as I was rolling down 101, I got a little emotional. I got a little teary, and I got really, really motivated to get her to get to Ireland. I'm like, we are for sure going to go, because I know she's absolutely going to love it. And it's because I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like in that moment that I fell a little bit more in love with it. And so I'm going to invite you today to fall a little bit more in love with our destination. And so here's 3 ways that we can learn to think about heaven in a way that will spark the imagination. The first way is that we need to know that heaven is a real physical place. It's a vibrant city on a renewed earth. Revelation 21 says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth had disappeared, and the sea was gone. And I saw a holy," what? "City, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of the heaven like a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, 'Look, God's home is now amongst his people.'" Hebrews 11 is talking about the saints that have gone before us, and says, "But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he had prepared for them a city." See, Scripture promises that the resurrection of God's people and of God's earth. See, this is a remarkable and exciting promise of the Messiah. Not only would he rule the heavens, which he's already been doing, but he would also rule earth, removing sin, removing death, removing poverty, removing heartache. So there are no pictures of ambiguous clouds or castles in the sky. See, it talks about heaven being the best of earth, the best intention of Eden. To put it simply, to imagine heaven, we need to imagine the best parts of earth. And I want to make sure I get this right. Imagine the best part of what creation has to offer, and then ask, what if? See, so often we imagine heaven in our minds, and it's this ambiguous thing. But heaven is going to be much more like earth, much more like Eden, much more like this new city and this new country than we may realize. And so a good way to start imagining what heaven is to start imagining the best of what creation has to offer, and then ask, what if? Because everything that we love about this earth and about this creation is all tainted by sin. It is all tainted by evil. But God said that he is going to redeem and renew and make all things new again. And so it's good for us to begin to spark the imagination and say, man, I love hiking up a vast mountain and overlooking an incredible vista. And now imagine that, but then say, but what if? What if there was a new color spectrum that my eyes can't see, but it will see on the other side of death? What if I could actually feel in greater detail the rocks underneath my feet? What if when I breathe in the air, it has a sweet scent? What if when I'm up there overlooking the vista, my eyes, which has been hampered and I had to use glasses to even just get to 20/20, what if my vision will be just so much greater? Because when God made man, he said it is good, and he is going to redeem the things that sin has stolen. And so imagine the best part of earth, and then start asking, what if? I love this quote by Anthony Hoekema. He says, since where God dwells, there heaven is, we can conclude to come to heaven and earth will no longer be separated, as they are now, but will be merged. Believers will therefore continue to be in heaven as they continue to live on the new earth. Randy Alcorn says, just as Adam was made from the dust of the earth, we will be remade to the dust to which we return to death. God's people are not looking deliverance from earth, but deliverance on earth. That's exactly what we will find after our bodily resurrection. I don't think it's an accident here that heaven paints heaven as being a new earth, and a new Jerusalem. He is redeeming the old and making it new again. And so by our best estimation, we can conclude that heaven is going to be a place, a physical place, a real place, a vibrant place with a vibrant city, with a real country. And it's not just a country, but it's a country led by a king that is worth serving and worth following. And so if we imagine heaven, we can start jogging our memories. We can start jogging our mind and ask, what's the best of creation? What's the best things that God has created on this earth? And then begin to ask, what if? What if it was a little bit better? What if it was a little bit more? What am I missing because of this veil of sin? The second way that we can jog our imagination to spark discovery about heaven is to know that heaven will be full of real physical people, unique individuals. Right after Jesus' resurrection, he comes to the disciples, and he says, look at my hands, look at my feet. You can see that it is really me. Touch me and make sure that I am not a ghost, because ghosts don't have bodies, as you see that I do. See, this is a really important couple of verses here, because it highlights two very important things. The first thing is that Jesus was in the flesh. After the resurrection, he was the first to be resurrected. He was the first to sort of step into that place where earth was finding its redemption place, and he was a physical person. Not only was he a physical person, but he was still Jesus. He didn't lose his identity. He didn't lose who he was. He didn't lose his memory. He didn't have like this amnesia thing where after the resurrection, he's like, who are you guys? Like, it's not a reset start over. but he brought he brought all of who he was into the resurrection. See, one of the lies we believed is that one of the lies that we believed is that we won't be people in heaven. But God made man physical in Genesis 1 and said it was good. So when Jesus resurrected from the dead, he did so in the physical. And like any belief, and sometimes we have this belief that physicality isn't good, but quite frankly, that isn't Christian. There's a lot of religious faiths out there that say the physical is bad. Buddhism says the physical is bad. Hinduism says the physical is bad. But that is not what Christianity is. God made man and said that it was good. Of course, sin has tarnished these things, and he has caused desires within the flesh that makes it contradictory to something that is good, but God is going to redeem the whole of creation, not just a part of it. And so this part of us that believes that the spirit is actually better than the flesh, this is a very Hellenistic thought. It's a Greek thought that crept its way into Christendom, and that's why Paul started writing against the Gnostics in the New Testament and saying, don't believe those things, but when Jesus was raised from the dead, he did so in the physical, fully. See, our physical bodies are an essential aspect of who we are. It's not just a shell for a spirit like a snail shell is for a snail. But when God sent Jesus to die, it was for our bodies as well as our spirits. See, he came to redeem not just the breath of life, which was the spirit, but also the dust of the ground, which was the body. Therefore, we will never be all that God had intended for us until our body and our spirit is adjoined with one another. R.A. Torrey says, we will not be disembodied spirits in the world to come, but we will be redeemed spirits in redeemed bodies in a redeemed universe. And so imagine with me just for a moment. Imagine, throw up slide 12 for me. Imagine for me this. Imagine the best version of yourself, both perfectly unique and whole. If you want to begin to spark the imagination of what heaven's going to be like, begin to imagine your whole self, but your perfect self. And not just your ailing self, but your whole self. And so we walk through this life and we're walking with certain ailments. Those things will be redeemed. It says that we'll get a new body, but it's going to still be us, and it's going to be like our perfect self. It's going to be the part that God intended all along, that sin has striped away some joy. And I know that many of you are walking right now with ailments, whether it's a physical handicap, it's a chemical imbalance in your brain. You're walking around not even knowing that you're in pain, but it's hurting you. Man, I was talking to you the other day about someone who he started going to the chiropractor, and he went once and realized he was hurt for years, and he just had no idea. And then I said, man, I'm never going to the chiropractor because I don't want to have to do that every week. Like, we're walking around with ailments and we don't even realize it. But begin to jog your brain of what this would look like. Imagine the best version of yourself, but perfect and whole. Because that is the intention, because God doesn't make anything less than perfect. And so when he takes away sin, and we find ourselves in the new heaven and the new earth, it is going to be perfect and whole. And so imagine for yourself no ailments. You're good looking, but not like fake. But your perfect whole body. It said in Revelation 5 that your racial identities will continue. So our ethnic history will continue on into heaven. And you will be individually you. So it's not like everyone is going to have their personality like me, even though that makes sense, because I am the pinnacle of many. No. But you are going to continue to have the unique things that make you you. So we're not just going to be clones. We're not just going to be, number 533. But we are going to find ourselves being uniquely myself. And just a side note, you're not going to be an angel. You're not going to be an angel. I know it's a good idea that someone died, like, well, an angel just gained, or heaven just gained another angel. It's a good idea, but that's not Scripture. You're going to be you. Angels have their jobs, and you're going to have your job. Heaven's going to be a real physical place. Heaven's going to be full of real physical people. And the last idea is that heaven will be full of adventure. New discoveries, deeper satisfaction, engaging work. Just look at the beginning of creation. At the very beginning, the thing that God intended for humanity to become. It says that the Lord placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and to watch over it. God brought the animals to the man to see what he would call them. And the man chose the name for each one. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib, and he brought her to the man. At last, he exclaimed. I love this passage because it just shows that vivid discovery and adventure and imagination. I love this at the very first. The Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend, to work, to do something. Heaven isn't going to be a boring place where we're just sort of like sit around and wonder what to do, but people are going to have jobs. You're going to have something to do, but it's not going to be like I'm just punching a clock and it's not something that's fulfilling for me. No, this is going to we're going to have a fulfilling work where purpose and occupation and vocation and what I'm doing is something that really, really matters. The first thing that man did in this garden is he tended over the garden. I love this. And then it says God brought the animals to the man to see what he would call them. Like it was some sort of mystery for God. Like he's like, all right, check this out. Check this out, Adam. All right, I'm going to bring in this thing. What do you call this thing? He's like, okay, that thing has a freaky long nose. It has a really big white things coming. You look like an elephant. And God's like, all right, this is pretty good. All right. Check out this one. Woo! This one smells, black stripe. This is a skunk. Like it was like a game. Like God's like, okay, I want to see what you call all these things. To see what this is. This is discovery. This is creativity. He is creating names for something that God has created. It's like a partnership here. And so we have no intent, or we have no reason to believe otherwise that we are not going to be creators and discoverers ourselves. The new heavens and the new earth is going to be full of new discoveries. And we're not going to be limited by time and how much we can go out and explore and discover. There's going to be creativity and discovery, and I believe in our music, in our art, in our relationship. There's going to be the things that we love here on earth. It's just a shadow of the kind of discovery and creation that we're going to find on the other side. And then I love that the Lord God saw that that man was lonely, and he said that the Lord made woman from the rib, and he brought her to the man. And the man said, at last. Like he saw all these animals, right? All these animals coming, and he's like, nope, that's not going to do. Nope, that's not going to do. Nope, that's not going to do. And he went through all the animals and all creation, and he's like, dude, there's nothing like me. There's no one that looks like me. And all of a sudden, God makes this woman for man, and he sees her, and he goes, at last. That's the puzzle piece. At last. To exclaim, to connect. And I believe that those are some of the things that we can imagine on the other side of heaven. And so, Sherman, will you throw up slide 14 for me? And so, to imagine this, imagine the desires. Imagine your desires in their purest forms being both fully known and fulfilled. See, desires can get us in trouble here on earth because our desires are never their purest form, right? We have a desire for intimacy, but it comes out in really weird ways, like lust and anger and vanity. We have desires to do good, but we have greed that gets in the way. But imagine with me in heaven imagine a desire in its purest form, both being fully known, because God fully knows the desires of man. He said it's not good that man be alone. I know that you need to do work. I know that you desire to tend something. I know that you want to discover something. And so it is both fully known and it is also fully fulfilled. How many of our desires here like we have these desires within us, but it's hard for us to articulate because we're embarrassed about them. We're like, oh man, I don't want to bother someone. I think that it's a weakness that I have this desire. But in heaven, our desires are going to be fully known and fully fulfilled. And so the desires of our heart that we try we almost have like a patchwork that we try to solve here on earth, like the real deal is going to be on the other side of death. And in heaven. So imagine, as you're driving down 101 and imagining heaven, imagine that your desires are in their purest form. They're both fully known and able to be fulfilled. See, because I believe, church, if we can begin to imagine heaven, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this next week, but I believe that a people on earth that imagine heaven are going to do the greatest work here on earth. That's why Colossians 3 says to set your mind on things of heaven. Because those that have their eyes set on heaven are going to do a great work here on earth. And so I want you to come back for this next week. But for now, I want us to just be caught in the romance of imagining what heaven's going to be like. Because we need to come to this reality that we'll never be satisfied with any person less than Jesus and any place less than heaven. I'm going to say that one more time. We'll never be satisfied with any person less than Jesus and any place less than heaven. As the worship team comes forward, John 14 has this great picture of Jesus, and he's talking with some of the disciples, and the disciples are saying, they're talking about the resurrection and the afterlife, and they're having a hard time of comprehending that. And how many of you guys have a hard time comprehending the afterlife? How many of you guys have a hard time of comprehending what heaven's going to be like? And here, Jesus is talking with Thomas, and Thomas says, "No, I don't know, Lord. We have no idea where you're going. How are we going to know the way?" And Jesus says, "I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one can come to the Father except through me." And so, we have a promise that is heaven. And the way, the roadmap to that place is Jesus. And so I believe as we pursue Jesus and as we encounter Jesus, that our imagination will become more vivid and more real, and we'll fall in love with this place that God is preparing for us. Because I never want to be in a place where I don't want to be distracted with the temporary if something better is on the other side. I don't want to be fooled. And I don't want you to be fooled either. And so will you stand with me together? And I'm just going to pray that we would that as we fall in love with Jesus, we will also fall in love with heaven. And that as we fall in love with heaven, we'll be convinced that our home is there, and we will, and that as we know that our home is there, that we will be eternally grateful because we have an earthly good to do while we